Hey everyone, in today's video we're going to go over one of the most requested videos that I can't believe I still haven't done yet, something that you'll find in every single React application that's using Materiel UI, and that is a header, otherwise known as an app bar by Materiel UI. Now this is pretty obvious why you would use this in a lot of different applications that you're building. It's essentially what you would find at the top of every single web page. Over here you can do things like add a little menu, you can add a title to the page you're on, you can have buttons, but most of all you can have sort of this ability to have a menu that will take you to different parts of your site. And in today's video I'm going to show you how to implement a pretty basic one of these, and also I'm going to show you how to make it a bit responsive so it looks a bit better, and on top of that I'm going to show you how to use it with React routers so you can direct your users to different parts of your site however you would like. And if you find value in this video, please consider either leaving a comment, liking, or subscribing. I can't tell you how much it helps with the YouTube algorithm to get these videos out there. I love reading all of your comments. This video, if you look at last week's video, is pretty much I'm doing it because someone in the comments suggested it, so I really appreciate it. And even though I don't get to reply to every single comment anymore, I still read each and every single one of them. So thank you guys for all the support, all the suggestions, and all the feedback. So without further ado, let's jump straight in. Appbar is a bit of a weird component in the sense that you actually need, if you scroll down to the bottom and look at the API section, two different components to build the header in your application. Number one is Appbar, which is the component we're looking at right now, and number two is Toolbar. And Toolbar doesn't have its own component page demoing how it works because it would pretty much almost always be used in conjunction with Appbar. And I'll show you just through this simple Appbar how that works. If you were to expand the code here, you'll see that if we scroll down, each header is comprised of essentially two different things. Number one is your app bar, and then number two is the toolbar within the app bar. Now the difference between these two components is that the app bar is pretty much what gives the positioning and what gives the styling in terms of layout to the actual header itself, and toolbar is sort of what gives this, for example, nice background that you see over here for every single application. Let's go in CodeSandbox and edit this and sort of play around with that specific Materiel UI example. If you were to see, I were to remove the toolbar that the app bar gets nested in, you'll see that everything internally sort of gets really jumbled up. And if I were to go back and keep the toolbar and remove the app bar, I think I had it the other way around. The app bar is what actually gives it its styling in terms of color and stuff like that, and the toolbar is what gives it its structure. You'll see here that we sort of have a regular bar. You can't really see it, there's not really any styling towards it, and also Appbar will give it sort of the structure that it will always stick to the top, so that header functionality, whereas toolbar will not do that. So if we go back, we can see once we have our app bar and our toolbar, inside of it is where you pretty much nest whatever you want to be inside of your header. So for example, we have a menu icon in this example, we have some typography that says news, and then we have a button that says login. And you'll notice that where it is positioned is all through use styles over here. So for example, our div wraps this entire header with root, but also if we were to look inside of the app bar to see the stylings, we can see, for example, our menu button has the menu button classes, and you'll see all they're really doing is just adding some margin. Our typography has classes.title, and all they're doing in classes.title is saying they're setting flex grow to 1, and what that will do is it will push whatever comes after this typography to the very end of the container div, which happens to be the login button, which as you can see is pushed to the end. So knowledge of Flexbox is also pretty beneficial to have while you are making a header. Now we can see if we scroll down, there are tons of different examples they have. They have header with more stuff inside of it. So for example, maybe a search bar, maybe some notification icons and stuff like that, maybe a menu. You can see here you have one specifically with a menu, another one specifically with just the search bar. They have a demo of them doing it with the prop dense, which will only work for desktop, but it'll make the margins and the padding around it a bit smaller, so the app bar doesn't take up as much space. Then you have prominent, which is pretty much, for example, if you wanted an app bar and then under it, let's say for example any page that you're on, you want to display some specific text and stuff like that. And then finally definitely for mobile and stuff like that, they give you an example of how to sort of make your app bar at the bottom of your application, and then with like a button. And I'm sure you guys have probably seen that if you use Android. App bars at the bottom of an app that look just like that. So there are tons and tons and tons of different things you can do with these components, but we're going to be focusing on just pretty much the basics, how to use Appbar with Toolbar, maybe make it a bit responsive with a menu, and also maybe make it a bit responsive with a menu and also work with React Router. And to do that, we're specifically going to go with this specific example right here, Appbar with menu. Now, before I go straight into that, let's take a quick look at just some of the important props that you'll see in Appbar and Toolbar. And you'll notice if you scroll down to the bottom of Toolbar, you only see it being used in Appbar. However, I think you can use toolbars in tables as well, so this isn't the only place you would use it. So if we go into the Appbar API, we can see that you can set things like color. You can set things like the position, which directly correlates to the CSS position of the entire div. And those are pretty much the main things that you're going to be using. Honestly, the fixed position is how standard app bars work. Unless you're trying to get a different functionality from your header, you wouldn't deviate from this fixed. And color obviously is something you could change depending on your application, depending on whether or not you set a primary color in your theme for your application, or whether or not you just want to set it to something different. And toolbar, you'll see here, there's not too much you can play with. They have, for example, variant being regular or dense, which we explored. Gutters, which is pretty much some extra padding on the left and right of the app bar. If you set it to true, it'll just disable that extra padding that you see there. So let's go ahead. If you aren't familiar with my videos, I have this one CodeSandbox which has pretty much React Router already set up, and I'm going to be using that for this example. So for example, if you come here, you'll see that in our app.js we have React Router set up with 3 different pages. Number 1 is the home page, which is just slash, and you'll see here all it is just text that says homepage. I have a slash contact page, so if I go to the application, type slash contact, it'll bring me to this page called the contact page, which, as you guessed it, is just a page that has text that shows contact. And then finally, we have the about page, which is no different from the previous 2. So what we want to do here is essentially add a header. And when we add that header component, I want it to be able to click which page we want to go to, and also I want to be able to control if the screen is too small. I want the header to not show any text in it, but just the menu, and then maybe a drop down menu where we can edit that. So to do that, we're going to come back to our documentation, and we're going to take this example right here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this entire thing into my header component. I've already set up a blank header.js component. Nothing's inside of it. And I'm going to be displaying it pretty much at the root level of our component, which is just app.js. So I'm going to go into header.js. I'm going to paste this all in. Now you'll notice in this example, they have a little switch bar where you can determine whether or not you want to show that little icon with the menu and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and get rid of all of that logic. So we'll see here, if I were to actually go ahead and uncomment this and import it, we'll see here that our app bar shows the way it showed in the Material UI example, but we just want to get rid of this logic, and we probably want to get rid of this as well. So let's go ahead and go into our header component and sort of start taking out all the boilerplate code that they had. So first thing, we're going to take that out. That's going to come with this function, which is going to come with this state variable. Let's just go ahead and remove that. We're going to get rid of the logic of whether or not to display that thing on the side based on that switch at the top. And finally, we're going to remove the imports. And now we just have a basic component that, as you see here, has a menu over here. And this drawer or this menu doesn't really work. I think it makes more sense to get rid of this, have this drawer icon here, and only show that drawer icon whenever we're in mobile form. So let's go ahead and modify that. If we come here, we can see that within our toolbar, this is where the real header code starts, from here to essentially here. What we're going to do is I'm going to take this icon button and this menu icon. I'm going to cut that out of here. So you'll see here now, if I save, it doesn't show up there anymore. And where we have this menu, we can see here this is where that's happening. We have an icon button, and then inside of here we have the account circle, which is that sort of profile looking picture. I'm going to replace all of that with our menu icon, so it sort of makes more sense when you try to open it. But one thing that we're missing is we have to add this on click to handle menu back in there. So I'm going to actually just paste this below, cut this in. Oop, did I cut that properly? Yep. And then I'm going to delete this code right here that shows the old menu button. So here we go. Now we have an actual menu icon that opens up the menu. And we'll go sort of into making those menu items actually going to the specific place we want to. So first, let's add a home option in this menu. Then we're going to add a contact option in this menu. And finally, we are going to add a, let's say, about option. Now, you'll see whenever someone clicks on one of these menus, right now what it does is it just calls this handle close function, which will pretty much close the menu. And if you're not too familiar with how menus work, pretty much there's two functions on having a menu open and close. One of them is called handle menu, the other one called handle close. All it really does is it sets this anchor state variable, and all that really is it tells you where the menu is going to open up. So if we click handle menu, if we click this menu icon, it's going to call handle menu, and it's going to set the anchor element's position to wherever our mouse was. And that's where this dropdown is sort of going to pop up. And then when we click on something that would essentially, close the menu, it'll set the anchor, pretty much the positioning of it, to null, which essentially just closes the menu. So that's all that's really happening there. You know how it's not really too intimidating. And then for whether or not the menu is open, so you see here our menu, the open is going to be based on this open variable. It's pretty much just going to be whether or not this anchor variable, this anchor state variable that we just talked about, that is getting set from these two functions, is going to be either a real number or a real value or just null. So pretty cool logic on Materiel UI's part, I would say. So what we're going to do is we're going to just pretty much add the router logic to make it so that whenever I click one of these, it'll go to that actual page, as well as closing the actual menu. So first things first, let's go ahead and instead of having the default export up here and stuff like that, we want to wrap this up in React Router. So I'm going to pretty much turn this into a regular arrow function. So const, I'm also going to name it header. And we're just going to make it a header function, or sorry, an arrow function. And at the very bottom, we're just going to say export default header. And you'll see that, there we go. So it's not working any different. We can also get rid of some unused imports we have up here. Now I'm going to import withRouter from react-router-dom. And if you're not familiar with React Router, I've used it in some of my other videos, but what it'll do is it's a higher order component. And when I wrap my application around with Router, you'll see if I were to query the props for header now, if I were to console.log the props and open up the console, and let me move this, there we go, out of the way so we have a bit more room for what's actually being shown on the screen. If I open the console and let's say refresh this, you'll see that all of a sudden I'm getting a couple of default objects coming in from React Router. So for example, I'm getting history, location, and match. I've gone over in previous video which each of these are going to be used for, but if we want to be able to pretty much go to a different URL in our application, we need to use something called history.push. So in our handle close, we're actually gonna call this something like handle menu click, so that the name makes a bit more sense. And we're gonna add this to every single one of these. And what I'm gonna pass into each of these over here is I'm going to make these arrow functions so that I can call it and pass in a specific value. So over here, I'm going to pass in, I'm going to take into this, I'm going to take in, let's say new route or new page, or let's say page URL, for example. So the page over, so I'm going to pass in null for this one because this one is essentially just the onClose function for the actual menu itself. And in fact, I don't even need to call handle menu on click for this one. I can straight up pass in this state variable set anchor el, just like this, and set this to null, so that we don't have to worry about weird paths being passed in from the on close for the menu itself. What we do want is to worry about the page names from the menu items themselves. So I have handle menu click, and in here I'm going to pass in the page route I want to go to. So for the home page, I just want to go to slash, and we can go ahead and copy this. And the reason we're making it an arrow function instead of keeping it regular is because when you want to call a function directly, aka pass something into it, if you were to just do that here without the arrow function, this will run every time this is rendered, and you'll see when this gets run, the React component will re-render, and you get into an infinite loop scenario. So the way you get around that is by making it an arrow function that calls on click that actually does the call itself. So we're going to make this go to the slash contact page, and finally we're going to make this one call our handle menu click thing, and we're going to make that go to about, just like that. Now you're going to see nothing's really changed. If we go in here, nothing's going to be clicked or anything like that. We get a console error. Let's see what this is for. Okay, so we just got a little error because it's in strict mode. Not that big of a deal. We can go ahead, get rid of this console log, and in here with this page URL, let's go ahead and destructure history from the props prop that we saw getting passed into the header. Sorry. And then over here, all we're gonna do is we're gonna say history dot push page URL. Now, if I were to go ahead and refresh this, you can see here we're on the about. If I were to open this menu and click home, bam, we get routed back to just regular slash. If I were to go click about, we get routed to about, and contact, we get routed to about contact. Sorry. So now that we have this working, let's put in the logic to only show this menu when the screen size is small, and then adding some items over here that will show up instead of this menu when the site isn't a regular screen size that's not, you know, a mobile one. So we're gonna come over here, and actually I have this page open up. If you don't remember from some of our other videos, the way you make media queries to actually get the breakpoint looks like this. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna import use media query, and there are lots of different ways to do this actually. In fact, if I were to look at theme breakpoint, let's see if we can let's see if they have an example here with the withTheme hook instead. Alright, it doesn't look like they do, so let's go ahead and just use this example. We can go ahead and import use media query just like that, and all we're going to do is we are going to take that example that we were looking at before. Let's see, over here. So what this will do is in our component itself, we can add this here. Oh, and we still need withTheme, so we can search up withTheme or useTheme. Let's check it out. So let's say useTheme. So this, so that withTheme is, so useTheme and withTheme I've talked about before, but the difference is when you use withTheme, you're using a higher order component that will actually pass the theme in as a prop. But if you use useTheme, it's a hook that will actually get you the theme variable. So we can go ahead and over here, let's see, where are the examples of useTheme? Over here. So you just import this from styles, just like that. And actually, we can straight up bundle this import with the make styles one. And then now we just pretty much have access to the theme variable in our component if we do this, essentially. Now, these two will work perfectly because this media query, what is going to do is it's going to check our theme variable to see what breakpoint we are currently in. So I can make a variable that will be a Boolean called, you know, let's say is mobile. And my condition for whether or not it'll be is mobile is if the theme.breakpoint is small or smaller than small, which pretty much encapsulates the breakpoint small or extra small. So now if I console.log, is mobile, just to show you guys in console what that will look like, we can see here right now it is being set to true because our screen's a bit small. But as soon as we start to expand our screen, you can see here it's no longer true. So let's set this to XS because I think small, with how zoomed in I am to CodeSandbox, is a bit big. You'll see here as I slowly make the screen smaller and smaller, all of a sudden we are now in mobile. So that is the logic we are going to use to determine whether or not we want to show our menu. So I can come over here and I can make a ternary in here. So right over here I can say something like is mobile, and then if it is mobile, I'll have all this code that displays the menu related stuff, just like that. Pop that in there. And then otherwise, I'm going to, let's just display a typography and then say not mobile. And we're going to replace this, but just to make sure this logic works. So let's see, what did we do wrong here? Okay, it looks like we forgot to add some fragments over here to make sure that we have a top level item inside of there, and there we go. So right now the typography will say, not mobile. But as I get smaller, it'll switch into this menu item, which is exactly what we want. So let's go ahead and now replace all of this logic properly with actual text here that will allow us to click it. So what we can do is, let's say for example, we just want a basic header that will show all the options. We can copy this icon button code over here. We can paste this, and we'll have, instead of a menu icon wrapped inside of it, we can put typography instead. Get rid of this on click, and we also can get rid of this class name over here. And you'll see here now, when I click one of these, and obviously the styling looks a bit ugly. In fact, maybe we can keep that menu button class. Let's see, does it make a square? Okay, so that menu button class doesn't actually make it look a bit nice either. But essentially, if you wanted it to look nicer, you can play around with the props for this menu icon. Actually, you know what? Why don't we just do that right now? So let's go to icon button, their API, and see if they have any quick props that allows us to, if given a negative margin, counteract the padding on one side. So let's try one of these out. So let's say the edges false. Let's see how that changes the sort of icon around it. Okay, so it still looks sort of weird. One thing we could do is, instead of having typography and icon button, which I think makes more sense, is we can actually just use a button and have, for example, something like home passed in. And whoops. And let's go ahead and import that. And I guess this makes a bit more sense also because we're going to be using an on-click to change the page. So we can see here, there we go. Now we sort of have a home button. The color of the button, let's go ahead and play around with that. So let's say color equals like secondary. Oops. Not the best. Let's see, if we go to the button API, let's see what other options we have for color. We might have to just straight up set it, or what we can actually do is set the variant equal to contained, and that will make it be a bit more noticeable. There we go. And we can go ahead, whoops, get rid of this, get rid of these that get automatically added, and let's remove the color so it doesn't look that far off. There we go. You'll notice here also that what is happening is our flex grow in our title is what is actually pushing this to the end of the page. One way we can solve that is pretty much just using our theme breakpoint to only apply this flex grow if we are in small again. So what I can do here is just pass this in the same theme breakpoint that we had down there. As you can see, we're passing theme into make styles, and we can pretty much say we're only going to apply this flex growth when the theme is on the XS breakpoint or down. So you'll see here now home will automatically move to the left, and when I make this smaller, bam, the flex row goes back to 1 and it pushes the menu all the way to the end. Now let's go ahead and add some more menu items over here. First, let's wrap this in a div, just like so. And let's just add a couple more of these. So home, contact, and about. Now you'll see it's all sort of bunched up. So what we can do is we can add a class name to this div. So classes dot, let's say, header options. Then up here we can go ahead and add a couple things. Number one, we can say displays flex. Number two, we want it to take up the whole width of the header, so we can go ahead and we can go ahead and have flex equal to 1, so it takes up all the space. And now if we go ahead and inspect, you'll see there are a couple of different styles I can add here to make this look a bit nicer. So let's go ahead and go into here. Let's make this a bit bigger. You can see we have our flex one and our display one here. If I were to, for example, add the justify content space evenly, you'll see that it spaces out a bit nicer. So let's go ahead and add that as well. So justify content, let's set that to space dash evenly. And there we go. So not the nicest looking thing in the world, but you can play around with the styles. This video is more to show you sort of the layout and how to get all of this working in the first place. And then the last thing we have to do is add it so when I click one of these buttons, it will actually work. Well, what we can do is we can create a const handle button click and handle it the exact same way as we did before for the handle menu click, except we're not going to be closing or modifying the menu. We could, if we wanted to be lazy, add this, or if we wanted to clean our code up a bit, we could actually have our handle menu click actually call this function, so it doesn't feel like redundant code. But just for display purposes, let's just go ahead, just so it's easier to understand, and add the same logic into here as well. And now for each one of these buttons, we're just going to add an onClick. So onClick equals the same way we did before. Go ahead and copy this for each one of these. Contact and about. And there we go. As we click it, we'll see the page display changes, or sorry, the URL changes. When we go into mobile, we get this sort of menu. And when we open it up, we come back to this view, and both of them work. And that is pretty much the basics of how a header works. Now, I suggest if you're really intent on learning how to sort of make this code a lot nicer and cleaner, fork this repository. And if you remember from our other video where we did this, we want to make this a lot more systematic and programmatic. So for example, we wouldn't have a brand new menu item over here. And I'll show you guys an example with the menu item, and then as sort of maybe a take home or a learning experience, you guys can apply the same logic to maybe these ones over here and simplify things. So what we can do to simplify this code a tiny bit, and there's a lot of things we can do to simplify this code, is we can have all this menu item stuff sort of be programmatically displayed. So for example, I can create a data structure called menu items, and in that data structure we can make that a list of objects, and in each one I can say, for example, menu title. I can have a menu title. Let's wrap this in an object, and I can have, let's say, a page URL. And so for example, if we look at our menu, the first one we have is called home, and that leads to the page URL, just slash. The second one we have is called contact, and that leads to slash contact. The third one we have is slash about, and that will lead to slash about. And now what I can go ahead and do here is, instead of displaying every single one of these just like you have here, just redundant code, I can just say menu items.map, and then I can get the menu item from there. And just simply, I can return one of these, and I can add menu item or even let's make it even a bit easier to understand. Instead of just having the JSS directly in there, I can make this a real function. I can destructure. So const, let's say like title and page URL equals menu item. And what that will do is it'll pull the title and page URL out of this menu item object, each menu item object, and I can just return pretty much one of these guys. And in here, I can in the menu handle menu click, I can pretty much just have the page URL. Oops. And in here, I'll pretty much just have the title. Let's go ahead and get rid of all of these now. There we go. Capitalize that. All right, and let's see if that works. Okay, so we have a bit of a bug. Let's do some debugging and see what is going on. First of all, let's console.log title and page URL to see if we're getting the correct ones. And it looks like our title is not getting it properly. Oh, right. I called it menu title. So that was the issue. And let's get rid of this console log. And we can see, let's see if it works. There we go. So just like that, we have it working, and we got rid of a lot of redundant code in the meanwhile. And most of the times, if you're building a full stack application, this sort of data, like what items to be displayed in the menu and stuff like that, will come from the backend. And this view is a lot better to work with that. As you, if you watch my Pokedex series, you'll see that's how I built out that whole application that was getting real data from an API. What I would do is I would sort of programmatically add all the data and then just loop through these data structures to display it. That way, if you ever add or subtract data, you're not, coming in here and removing or adding another button tag. So I challenge you guys to fork this repo, do the same thing that I just did here with these regular buttons. Try out maybe simplifying the code a bit by maybe making the function structure a bit nicer, and maybe edit the styling a bit to make the header look a bit nicer. But that is pretty much how header works. It was a bit more of a complex example, but I know a lot of you guys wanted to see how it works responsively, and that is how it is done. So once again, if you found value in this video, please consider subscribing, leaving a comment really helps, liking the video. I can't tell you how much it helps with the YouTube algorithm to help get these videos out there. It really helps. I love, as I said before, I love seeing all your feedback and all your comments, and I hope you're all staying safe, and thanks again for watching.